Hi, my name is Jonathan, and I'm one of the co-founders at Tribe of Five. I'll tell you more about that later, but first and foremost, I wanted to say thank you for tuning in to this presentation. I feel very excited to talk about something that has really become near and dear to my heart, and that is really how to network. Just for reference, for a long period of time, I was completely thinking about it and doing it all wrong. It wasn't until I started taking a product manager's approach to networking before things started working out for me. You see, by taking this approach and documenting the experiments that I put myself through, I've captured learnings from some huge wins and some colossal failures as well. I want to share those learnings with you tonight. My goal is for this to be a catalyst for you to level up your networking skills. Why? Well, because I know that you are going to need this skill in order to get where you want to go in your career. I'm embarrassed to say this, but for the longest time, the idea of actively building my network was something I considered below me. You see, I thought that I was smart and that I could do good work, and those two things alone would get me ahead in life. What's worse is that I also kind of thought that networking was for people who weren't smart or they couldn't do the good work, and so that's why they networked. So sadly, for the first half of my professional career, something like 5 or 6 years, and really, if you think about it, many years of school before that, I operated from this mindset because, well, that's what I believed. And along the way, I kept seeing what I thought were more signs of success. So I just kept plowing ahead with this approach. Everything was fine until it wasn't. And in that very moment, when things were all crumbling around me, I realized the terrible mistake that I had made with my entire attitude towards networking. In the past 5 years, though, luckily, this has completely changed. Really, out of necessity, I've slowly and methodically developed an entirely different mindset. I now believe that by making small and consistent investments into my network, that in the long run, it will unlock huge gains back for me. And each day that I practice what I preach, networking becomes more of a habit, meaning something that I can do without really needing to think about it. I'd really love to tell you that I could help you adopt this mindset by listening to this talk. But unfortunately, it doesn't work exactly like that. Think about all the times that someone gave you good advice. Things like drink more water or go for a walk each day. Sure, it makes sense. But until you actually try it out for yourself, it won't become a habit for you. The good news is that I'll give you the playbook that I've been developing and testing over the past 5 years. And really, you can use it right away, no matter if you're just starting out with your networking or if you've been dabbling for a bit and you're ready to take it to the next level, or if you consider yourself a pro and you're just really refreshing some of the basics. The bad news is that having this playbook alone won't bring about any change. You will still have to really put in the work. So I really want you to think about this talk more like medicine and less like an elixir. Medicine is something that you have to take to keep getting better, and networking is something you have to take to get better. On the other end, an elixir is some sort of magic potion that you take once and you wake up and you become a better version of yourself. This talk is much more like medicine. Before we get in really to the meat of our conversation, let's first define two key words: community and network. What is a community? Well, to me, a community is a group of people who come together because of some common interests. And that common interest can really be anything. It could be running, it could be product management, it could be a love of movies, really anything. But I argue that you have to have a common interest. Otherwise, you just become a random smattering of people. But what's really cool about communities is that they have shared values. And so let's take running as an example. As a runner myself, I treat Friday nights and Saturday mornings differently than many of my non-running friends. Now, what's really cool is if I'm a runner and you're a runner, and I know what you believe and you know what I believe in our values, something really magical happens. Trust starts to develop. And trust is vitally important because at the end of the day, when we need help, when in times of need, we are social animals and we tend to help people who we trust. So even though on the surface, people come into communities because of common interests, I think that they really stay because of the shared values, the trust, and the help that comes along with it. Now, I also argue that every single person is a part of multiple communities. And I highlight this because these communities will really change over time based on where you live, what your common interests are, and what phase of life that you're in. Additionally, communities exist both online and in the real world, and some even exist in both. Finally, something important to know about communities is that within each big community, there will be sub-communities. And these sub-communities might not get along. For instance, there is a sub-community of runners who believe that you should never wear your headphones when you run. There are a separate sub-community of runners who think it's very much okay, and they even encourage you to wear your headphones when you run. Now, these two sub-communities can actually butt heads because of this difference in value. All right, let's now look forward at the word network. Now, when I say the word network, all I'm referring to is your specific reach within any communities that you associate with. So again, if you're big in the running community and you really know a lot of people, you have a extensive network there. And similarly, if you are trying to just break into product management and you don't know anyone really, and you're just starting out, your network is probably pretty shallow. One important thing that I'll highlight is that your network is not directly your LinkedIn count. I'm willing to bet that you've got a bunch of people on your LinkedIn who you don't feel comfortable reaching out to. You don't know anything about them, and they don't know anything about you, and yet you're connected. So don't mistakenly think that the size of your network is simply based off of some social media account like LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or otherwise. With those two definitions out of the way, let's look at one of my favorite quotes. And it says, "Every master was once a disaster." This is something that I almost remind myself every single day because it's very easy to look externally and only see people who are much better than you are. And sometimes when you look at those people, you think, wow, they must be such a natural at that. And I'm not natural, and so I'll never be as good as they are. But again, this quote, "Every master was once a disaster," it reminds me that if you zoom the clocks back in time, you'll see a whole different picture of these masters that we think of today. Let me explain. As an example, let's look at Jeff Bezos. And if you don't know Jeff Bezos, he is the founder and CEO of Amazon. He also owns the Washington Post. And in addition, he is exploring commercial space travel through his company, Blue Origin. The man on the left, this version of Jeff Bezos, that's a badass dude. But if we rewind the clocks back to 1999, we'll see a whole different Jeff Bezos. This is a man who literally has a desk that is made out of a door placed on cinder blocks. And all of the famous principles and frameworks that we know of today about Amazon at the time were only an inkling of an idea. He made so many mistakes along the way trying to become this master, who he is today. But back in 99, we see a very different Jeff Bezos than we see today. It's a very similar story if we look at Mark Zuckerberg. Now, the man on the left here, he looks calm, cool, collected, and poised as he's delivering some big update about Facebook. But if we rewind the clocks back just 8 years, we see a whole different Mark. In 2010, Mark Zuckerberg was on stage at the All Things D conference, and something went wrong. I don't know exactly what it is, but he started sweating profusely. And if you look at this picture closely, you can see the glistening on his face. It got so bad in the middle of the talk that he had to take off his hoodie because he was literally sweating through his shirt and his hoodie. Now, Mark Zuckerberg of today, he's awesome and he's taken over the world. But just 8 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg was a very different man, just really learning how to be poised on stage and learning how to really command attention. Finally, let's also look at Elon Musk. This is the man who is the head of Tesla, SpaceX. He's doing AI stuff. He's digging tunnels under LA, and basically every cool thing that you can imagine, Elon Musk is a part of. Now, let's zoom back the clocks on him. Well, actually, time out here. I did zoom back on Elon Musk, and I'm starting to develop an opinion that he might not be a human. You see, everything that Elon Musk touches turns to gold. And everything that he does, he seems to have such strong conviction for. So let's actually scratch this out because he might not be a good example. What I'm really trying to say is that for 99.999% of people, when you try something new, most likely you are going to suck at it at first. And along the way, you're going to make a bunch of mistakes. And then slowly, you're going to figure out how to do something right. And because of that, you're going to get a little better. But you don't become really good just because of that, because you're going to keep sucking and keep making mistakes. And you're going to go over this process over and over and over again. As I really learned how to network, I went through a very similar journey. And so tonight, what I'd really love to do is share some of my mistakes that I've made, as well as some things that I've figured out. What I'll do is share some stories about each, but then really take some time to distill the lesson I learned from it and give you a way to try this at home for yourself. Let's start from the beginning with what I'll call my rookie level mistake. My big mistake, and the one that I made for the first 6 years of my professional career, was to completely neglect my network. The gift and the curse of my first job coming out of school was that it gave me a network instantly, and I didn't have to do any work for it. You see, my first job out of school was with Goldman Sachs in the technology division. And if you aren't familiar, let me give you a quick overview so I can explain what I mean. You see, Goldman hires a bunch of new grads, and we all start together as an analyst class. So, as one of hundreds of new hires, instead of being told to report to the office and to meet our teams on the first day, we first all went through a 10-week training program together. So roughly every single day, 300 of us went to class, and it was on a campus, and we had teachers and homework and assignments and projects. Now, this isn't really the exciting part of the story. The exciting part is that we all ate lunch together, and because most of us weren't from New York, it was very natural for us to hang out together on nights and weekends too. Now, again, the gift was that because of this environment, it was super easy to meet a whole bunch of people. And the curse was at the same time, because it was so easy to meet these people, because I got this head start, I didn't feel the need to make more investments to grow and nurture my network along the way. You see, I was smart enough to get myself onto a bunch of different email lists that were forming right when the analyst class started. I was invited to a bunch of events and saw a steady flow of fun things going on. And I attended, but I didn't really make any investments in. You see, while I attended, I didn't really set up events and invite people to go. I didn't really bring my friends and try to cross-pollinate relationships. And I certainly didn't hang out with people one-on-one outside of these groups. But it didn't matter at the time that I didn't invest into the network because I was on enough of these email lists that I consistently had a flow of events that I could tag along to. 6 years later, when I decided to leave Goldman Sachs to start my first company, I naively thought that I had a strong network at my back because I was on all these email lists and because I had a steady flow of events where I met friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends. I distinctly remember when this reality got shattered. It was pitch black outside when I woke up. Feeling disoriented, I rolled over and looked at my phone and realized that it was only 3 in the morning. My eyes were so extremely tired, but my mind had already started racing. Within a matter of seconds, I felt this level of stress and anxiety in my chest, and I knew that I wasn't going to go back to sleep anytime soon. This had become a thing ever since I'd left Goldman to start my company. And unfortunately, it was getting more and more frequent. Each night that I woke up, it was another reminder that I couldn't get my company off the ground. I left Goldman Sachs because I had this idea to build an app to help people find running buddies. It was called Runtourage, and the basic idea was this. Let's say I'm a marathon runner, and you're a marathon runner, and we're training for the same marathon. Wouldn't it be cool if this app could somehow help us meet up together and find each other so we could train? Well, the thing is, ideas are cheap. And at the end of the day, I didn't know how to execute against this idea. I thought I did, but I didn't. And to make matters worse, I also realized that I'm running out of money. You see, I set aside some bonus money to bootstrap Runtourage before somehow I would get traction and VC funding that would come with it. And now, to top it all off, every single day, I'm getting a lesson from the school of hard knocks that everything you want to do is hard, and it's especially hard to do when you're trying to do it alone. It was a pretty low moment in my life. I remember sitting in the dark, scrolling through Facebook and then LinkedIn and realizing I didn't really have anyone that I could reach out to. You see, I hadn't invested in my relationships. And so now out of the blue, what was I going to do? I was going to ask people to come get me out of this pickle. It wasn't until this moment that I realized just how badly I had neglected my network over the years. And sadly, by the time that I realized it, there wasn't much that I could do. This is because when you need help, and I promise you there will always be a time when you're going to need help, your network is really going to be there for you only if you've invested your time to grow and nurture it. The big lesson that I learned was don't neglect your network. If there's anything that you take away from tonight, it should be this. Don't neglect your network because at some point in time, you will need it and it will only be there for you if you've taken the time to invest in it. So you should probably be asking in your head, when should I start investing in my network then? And I argue that the best day to start was actually yesterday. But since you can't go back to yesterday, start today. Let's talk about a few ways that you can start right away. Let me show you a better way to do things. Virginia is a friend of a friend. At the time that I was off doing Runtourage, we didn't know each other that well. Surely in group environments, we would have hung out together, but I certainly hadn't taken the time to invest in our relationship. But that didn't stop her from going out of her way to help me out. You see, she must have found out somehow that I was seriously flopping around. And it just so happened that she had caught up with two old coworkers at American Express who had joined a new team and they were looking to grow. So she sent me a note out of the blue and said, "Hey, they seem like they're doing something cool. Would you want to get an introduction to these people?" You see, Virginia went out of her way to help make an introduction for me. Really, she didn't need to do that. And actually, it would have been much easier for her not to. She had to take time out of her day to send me an email, and then to send an email to her coworkers, and then to put her social capital on the line for me. But she did it anyways. And she did it without the expectation of anything in return. She just went out of her way to help me out. That small gesture on her part gave me a foot in the door that I desperately needed. I'm going to skip over the whole part of how I actually made it through the interview. And don't get me wrong, that was lots of hard work. But this is how I got my first PM title. It's because of Virginia. The lesson that I really take away from this whole experience, and something that I've really adopted into my own approach to networking, is to always seek ways to add value to the network. But I'm not suggesting that you be Mother Teresa and do this 10, 12, 16 hours a day. Rather, I suggest you keep it small, but keep it sustainable. So here's something that you can try out at home. The next time that you come across a good article that you read, or a podcast, or a book, or really anything, it just has to be something that you enjoyed. Before you close it out and move on with your day, think about one person in your network who could potentially get some value out of it. Then send it to them. This is how easy it is, right? Open up an email and write, "Hey, person, read this article, thought of you." Put the link and say, "Hope you enjoy," and then send it off. Now, if you actually do this, I bet that you'll be surprised what happens next. As I've done it, it's opened up coffee chats, it's given excuses to rekindle relationships, and it's opened up doors that I never thought possible. My rookie level mistake and my rookie level learnings got me on the path to think about networking very differently. And as I progressed, I want to share with you my intermediate level mistake. Here's what happened. After I got the job at Amex, I was a man on a mission. You see, there was lots to learn, and I found myself reading PM books and articles and anything I could get my hands on to just try to figure out how to be a good product manager. Eventually, I convinced my manager to send me to a part-time product management course through General Assembly. I ended up loving the class and having such a good experience that I even went back to help teach it the next time around. Now, I tell you this because the more I learned about how to actually build product, the more I reflected back on the failures of Runtourage. Fundamentally, with Runtourage, I had an idea, then I went out and built the product, and my plan was to test and look for people afterwards. But because the app was really dead on arrival, I was never actually able to find people to try it out. I had a vague notion of the types of people who would use Runtourage and get value out of it and ultimately refer their friends to it, but these at best were only assumptions, and none of it was validated. But underneath, I still really believed that there was something there with accountability buddies. As I learned more about PM frameworks, I learned about the importance of taking a hypothesis-driven approach. Simply put, that means stating a hypothesis about how you think the world works and then designing experiments to validate that. I developed this hypothesis that most people have had a good experience with accountability buddies in their life, maybe in the form of study groups or sports teams or a music band, but that today most people don't actively have accountability buddies in their life. This presented an interesting opportunity for me to work on a side project and to experiment with all these new PM frameworks that I had now acquired. This time around, though, I vowed to do things differently. Instead of what I did with Runtourage, again, starting with an idea, building a product, and then going to test it, I wanted to flip things around. So, what I wanted to do was to first find people who would validate the idea and the problem that I was putting forth before I would ever go build a product. This has ultimately become Tribe of Five, which is what I'm currently working on now. As background, Tribe of Five is an accountability app that helps you make significant progress on your personal goals. Think about things like reading, meditating, journaling, stretching, things you know you should be doing, but probably aren't doing consistently. What we believe is that by pairing you up with like-minded people, that you and them will have much better odds of achieving your goals by working together to get better. Now, back to the story. At the time, I only really had a vague idea of what this could be, but I knew it centered around accountability. What I needed to do first and foremost was to find other people who were into accountability. And Reddit seemed like a very natural place to go. You see, I had lurked on Reddit for quite a few years, and I knew that there was a subreddit called Get Motivated Buddies. This is where people would go to post questions about accountability buddies and to look for accountability buddies. So that's where I went. At first, I started carefully reading their posts and engaging with them to learn about what they were wanting to get out of an accountability buddy. And guess what? It worked. Some of them replied to me. And later, when I told them about the project that I was exploring, some of them even visited the Tribe of Five landing page. A few of those people subscribed, and a few of those people even agreed to test out this product that I told them I had, even though I didn't have a product. I ended up testing a bunch of email-based 30-day accountability challenges to help people read more, exercise more, share gratitudes, and other things. It was fantastic and I learned so much through the experience, but here's where I went wrong. I started to get greedy and I started to think about quantity over quality. Basically, in my head, I was thinking, how could I get more people to sign up? If I could get a few people, wouldn't more be better? Now, in the process of thinking about quantity first, I ended up getting myself shadow banned from Reddit. This means that I was invisible. I could still message people, but no one would get it. I could like and comment on threads, but it was only visible to me and not to anybody else on Reddit. Effectively, I became a ghost. All of that work that I had done to engage with the community and to build relationships with people were all wiped out instantly because my account was shadow banned. And so the lesson that I learned the hard way was that quantity is not the way to go. I believe that quality will always trump quantity, especially when it comes to networking. You see, in my opinion, real connections are the secret way to build your network. Don't think about quantity, think about quality. Here is a much better way to do things. Shaw is a friend of mine and someone who I consider to be a much better networker than me. He's so good, as a matter of fact, that I've just taken parts of his playbook and adopted it for my own. Back in January, he reached out to me randomly. Well, at least at the time, I thought it was random. He had an extra ticket to an event where Biz Stone, the co-founder of Twitter, was speaking. And he asked me if I wanted to go with him. Of course, I accepted that offer. It's not every day I get to go hear Biz Stone. Well, anyways, we met up before the event and caught up one-to-one. And then we attended the Biz Stone event, and that gave us a bunch of fodder for conversation. And as we were walking home that night, we learned what each other were really up to and identified some ways that we could help each other out. That was back in January. Then, in February, I returned the favor and invited him to an event that I was going to. And then, in March, I ended up spending an afternoon at his office sharing overlapping knowledge on a product that he was working on and something that I had worked on in the past. All of this really happened out of one email he sent back in January inviting me to an event. I recently asked him about this idea to catch up with people in this way, and he said, yeah, of course it works. Think about it. Most of the time when you go network, you'll go grab beers with someone, but there's only so much conversation to be had. But by pairing it up with a meetup event, now all of a sudden it becomes a much richer experience. And the entire time, he completely focused on quality and not quantity. All we did was talk one-on-one the whole time. The lesson that I really take away from that experience is to go for quality, not for quantity. Paul Graham really says it well, and he says, do things that don't scale. I think as far as networking goes, he's talking about the same thing. He's saying don't do like Jonathan did for Reddit, but instead do like Shaw does for networking. Finally, put another way, what I'm really talking about here is that you have to play the long game when it comes to networking. You have to think about things in terms of relationships and not transactions. Here's an idea of something that you can try at home. Do what Shaw does. The next time that you are going to a meetup event, invite someone to go with you. Now, maybe they'll go, maybe they won't go, but you should put the invite out there. If you find yourself at a meetup event by yourself, focus on meeting one or two people only. Don't do the standard approach of trying to shake hands and get connected on LinkedIn with 10 people, because at the end, you'll probably not have any quality reasons to reach out to them. But instead, focus on just one or two and focus on really having a good quality conversation. Let's keep moving along. I want to tell you the story of what I'll call my advanced mistake. Now, when you're working on something that you really care about, and for me, it's Tribe of Five, it can feel weird when you tell other people about it, but they just aren't as excited as you are. I failed to see that I was doing this with a friend, and now they don't respond to my emails anymore. And I've tried 3 or 4 different times to re-engage, but silence. You see, I thought that the more interesting that I could be about Tribe of Five, whether it be about progress that we were making or insights that we were finding out, I thought that the more they would understand my vision and become a true fan of what I was trying to do. But actually, the exact opposite thing happened. I'm going to leave their name out of it, but since I first told Tim, and I'm doing that in air quotes, since I first told Tim about this rough idea of Tribe of Five, he seemed to be on board. He supported what I was doing and encouraged me to keep thinking about the project. As a matter of fact, he even took part in a recent beta test that we had just completed. But now, he doesn't talk to me anymore. It was only really recently that I realized the negative impact that I had made by trying to be interesting. In the past year or so, Tim and I had met up a few different times to catch up. Each time that we did, I'd ask him what he was up to, and he was always doing something pretty cool. So while he was telling me, I was nodding my head, but secretly, in my little monkey mind, all I was thinking was, when do I get to talk? When do I get to talk about Tribe of Five? When it was my turn, I'd talk, and talk some more, and more. And when he would politely ask me some questions, I interpreted that to mean that I was breaking through. And so I turned it up even more and tried to be more interesting. Think about this now. All I was doing was focused on me. Me, 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 me. I cringe at what I did because if someone else put me through that, I certainly wouldn't want to hang out with them for too much longer. The painful lesson that I had to learn is that the more you try to be interesting, the more that it works against you. And it can be so bad that you can lose friendships over this. So yes, you can dominate a conversation and you can say all the things that you want to say in a conversation. But at the end, if you are trying to be too interesting, I found that it works against you. If being interested isn't the way to go, what is? Well, let me share a better way to do things. Steve is a prominent VC in New York City. He's been in the game for over 10 years, and in that time has really built up his personal brand and a good reputation. A fellow entrepreneur emailed me a few months ago because Steve was launching a side project that had a lot of overlap with Tribe of Five. You see, Steve was also building a community of people who cared about changing their habits. His idea was to start building this community in New York City and ultimately to expand from there. Because of this overlap and because of this common interest of self improvement, I reached out to Steve to set up and get coffee. Now, I'm pretty sure that every single day, Steve gets multiple emails from founders who are trying to set up coffee and pitch their projects. And if you just do a back of the envelope calculation, you'll see that he probably says no to the majority of them. And if you know anything about VCs, you'll know that they are notorious for not taking cold intros. That's because they want things to come through their networks and get vetted along the way. So then how did I break through with a cold email to get his attention and then to set up a 1.5 hour coffee session and leave the chat with him proactively introducing me to another founder in his network? Well, here's the secret. I approached the entire thing from a be interested, not interesting mindset. I'll say that once again. I was trying to be interested and not interesting. So instead of focusing on Tribe of Five, I focused all of my attention on his project. The truth of the matter is that I was interested in what he was doing. I wanted to learn more about his vision, about what he had learned along the way, and what he was trying to do next with his project. And so in my cold initial email to him, I made it clear that I had a different reason for reaching out. I wasn't going to pitch him Tribe, and I wasn't going to ask him to invest in it. Instead, I pointed out some of our shared values based on blog posts that I had read ahead of time. And I made it clear that I had some valuable learnings from Tribe of Five that I thought could help him out. When we met up, I spent the majority of my time asking him about his project. At first, he seemed a little bit reserved, like he was trying to figure out if I was fake interested, but finally he got into a groove. He actually pulled out his phone and he had pages and pages of notes that we went through line by line to compare learnings. And of course, without me trying to be interesting, he became interested in what I was doing. So he started asking questions about Tribe, about what my vision was, and we really locked in that we had overlapping problems that we were both trying to solve. I was pretty happy to just have an hour and a half of his day, but then he really surprised me. He casually mentioned another entrepreneur that's in the same space and suggested that I should meet him. I was thinking, yeah, I mean, of course I know this guy, but I'm not connected to them in any way. And then Steve just went out of his way and said, yeah, he's one of my buddies. Let me make an intro. That intro led to some back and forth emails with this other entrepreneur that exposed a bunch of new insights for me to consider as I move forward for Tribe. So now all of this has happened because I was trying to be interested and not interesting. That is the lesson that I really want to share. You have to be interested. You cannot try to be interesting. Now, even though this sounds pretty easy, I actually think it's pretty hard to do. And so if you want to try this out, I suggest that first you keep the stakes low. So instead of going out and just doing this with a stranger, try it out with a friend first. I suggest that you go for something like a 70-30 or 80-20 mix of being interested versus being interesting. You can't go 100% of the way because that's really, really weird. But for each person, you'll have to figure out what your level is at. So I suggest, again, try this with a friend until you feel comfortable. Then try it out with a coworker. And then finally, try it out with some strangers. I have two caveats that I have to share if you do this. First, you actually have to be interested. You cannot be fake interested because people will sniff that out very quickly. Additionally, in order to be interested, you have to put in some work ahead of time. You can't go into a conversation, you can't send out an email without knowing anything about the person. How can you be interested if it's blind, right? We've just covered a bunch of stories across my journey to become better at networking. So if you remember, as a rookie, I neglected my network and I paid the price dearly. And then slowly over time, I learned actually a better approach is to invest in my network and do small, sustainable things along the way. As I became what I'll just say intermediate level networker, I got slapped in the face when I tried to think about quantity first. And then I got reminded from my buddy Shaw that quality always trumps quantity. The further along that I went, the more I tried to be interesting. And by being interesting, I ended up losing a friend. But I ended up gaining new connections when I remembered that instead of being interesting, I should be interested. Next up, I'm going to continue making mistakes and I'm going to continue learning how to get better. I believe there's probably another 10 or 20 levels of networking that I have to learn, and I see people along the way who are way better than me. And so that's what I'm going to do. I hope that one of these stories today resonates with you, and one of the lessons is something that you can take away and try out for yourself. In closing, I want to leave you with another one of my favorite quotes. And it says, "Don't judge each day by the harvest that you reap, but by the seeds that you plant." And this is very pertinent to networking. You cannot focus on the results. All you can focus on is the effort that you put in. Or put another way, the seeds that you plant. But I know that if you keep focused on planting seeds, you will get results from it. And so, with that, I want to thank you for tuning in today and listening to this presentation. I also wanted to leave my contact information in case you actually try out one of these suggestions that I've recommended tonight. Or maybe you have a different technique to networking that's way better than something I've suggested, in which case, reach out to me. Let's chat. I'm always willing to learn. And finally, if you want to follow along with the journey of Tribe of Five, I encourage you to come check it out and to give one of our accountability challenges a try. Thank you very much.